I'm going to tell you how long it takes to settle a personal injury case. I'm going to share some strategies that I've used to get the settlement in the shortest amount of time possible. I'm talking about car accident cases, motorcycle and truck accident cases, and all types of cases where someone's injured due to someone else's fault. I'm Florida personal injury attorney Justin Ziegler. Let's look at a case where I received a $260,000 settlement within 10 months for an Uber driver who was driving in Miami, Florida. He was driving straight down the road. The other vehicle was coming in the opposite direction. The other vehicle made a left-hand turn and the Uber driver crashed into him. Now, the Uber driver spent about 6 days at the hospital and he had a very large hospital bill. But the reason why this case took 10 months to settle is because the other driver had a very large auto insurance policy. It was $1 million. When there's a very large auto insurance policy in play, and the Uber driver or any injured victim's injuries aren't worth nearly that amount, it doesn't put pressure on the insurance company to settle because they're not going to be liable for any amount above the policy limits. They don't have a fear of a jury awarding more than the policy limits if the case value is worth a lot less than the policy limits. His case was worth a lot less than the policy limits because although he had a fracture of one of the lamina on the vertebrae of one of his spine and he spent several days at the hospital, he did not have surgery. He also had a herniated disc in his spine. Another reason why this case did not settle in a lot less than 10 months was because the Uber driver ended up getting physical therapy. Generally speaking, an injured person doesn't want to settle his personal injury case until he or she is finished with the treatment. The other van's insurance company paid the $260,000 settlement. You can see the settlement check here. The reason why the other van's insurance company paid the settlement because the van's driver was at fault. After my lawyer's fees and paying back the medical bills that were owed and the Medicaid lien and my attorney costs, my client received a check for $167,982 in his pocket. Now that does not include the interest on a loan that he took. So how could that case have settled in a lot less than 10 months? That case could have settled a lot quicker than 10 months if my client would have had several surgeries to his spine. So let's say he had a burst fracture in the accident and then he had a fusion and that procedure went wrong and he had an infection and he needed other surgeries. The value of that case could be worth more than $1 million, but a fracture of one of the lamina of the spine that does not need surgery is not worth $1 million. If you are someone who has a massive lost wage claim due to a fractured lamina of the spine, such as LeBron James, a famous basketball player, a soccer player, or a brain surgeon that needs to be able to stand when he's performing an operation, perhaps the lost wage claim and the injury may be worth $1 million. But for most run-of-the-mill cases, your average person, a fractured lamina of the spine is not nearly worth $1 million. So in this case, there's $1 million policy limit and the insurance company did not have pressure to quickly pay. Let's look at a $170,000 settlement that settled within 9 months of the accident. My client, Zach, was a rear-end passenger in a rental car and the rental car slammed into the car in front of it. Essentially, this was a rear-end accident, except that my client was in the car that did the rear-ending. Now, my client ended up having surgery, a plate and screws put into his upper arm, and he healed very well. He did go to the hospital and he spent some time there, but overall, when you looked at the medical records, it said patient is doing very well, patient does not have pain. So those type of cases are going to be worth a little bit less. The fact that the rental car insurance company had $1 million or $2 million limit in this case did not put pressure on them to quickly settle. My client's case was worth $170,000, which is obviously a lot less than $1 million, so it did not put pressure on the insurance company to settle. So after attorney's fees, cost, and paying back the very small medical bill in this case, my client got a check for $113,260 in his pocket. So how could my client's case have settled a lot quicker? The only way that this case would have settled a lot quicker is if my client would have had significant other injuries, such as if my client had a serious brain injury, or if my client was unfortunately killed in the accident. Those case values are very large. So when the case value gets larger than the insurance policy limits, that puts significant pressure on the insurance company to settle. They don't want their insured to then get a judgment against them and sue them for bad faith, and then the insurance company may owe above the policy limits. Also, if my client would have had a broken leg and a broken knee and maybe a broken foot, all with surgery in addition to his broken arm with surgery, perhaps that would have put pressure on the insurance company to quickly settle and pay the $1 million limits. Let's now look at one of the fastest time periods I've ever received a large settlement check in a personal injury case. Allstate sent us a check for the $100,000 driver's policy limits within 8 days of the crash. My client Ryan was driving a car in Clearwater, Florida, heading straight, and another oncoming vehicle made a left into him. Ryan T-boned the at-fault driver. The at-fault driver was insured by Allstate. Ryan had a tibial plateau fracture, which is a fracture right below the knee. Hardware and screws were put into his lower leg bone. Now, the other driver only had a $100,000 bodily injury liability insurance limit. A tibial plateau fracture, a lower leg fracture with surgery, is worth more than $100,000. I'm referring to just the pain and suffering component of the case. That's not even in addition to medical bills, which even puts it way above that amount. So Allstate, knowing that it only had a $100,000 policy limit and that the case value was worth somewhere around $300,000 plus, quickly paid the $100,000 within 8 days. Now, I did not cash that $100,000 settlement check. Why not? Because my client was from Georgia. He had uninsured motorist insurance, and the Georgia uninsured motorist insurance policy and law required my client to sue the at-fault driver, which typically you don't need to do in Florida, but when you're dealing with an out-of-state insurance policy, you may have to follow that law, or you could potentially lose the uninsured motorist case. Another reason I didn't deposit Allstate's $100,000 settlement check, because then we would have wound up in federal court if and when I filed a lawsuit. If your only claim is against an out-of-state uninsured motorist insurer, you may wind up in federal court, which can be a lot stricter than state court. So even though Ryan was on a work trip in the state of Florida, he had uninsured motorist insurance on his car in Georgia. He had a $500,000 limit, which is above what I thought the full value of the case was. Travelers Insurance, who was his uninsured motorist insurer, paid us $200,000 within 16 months of the accident. Because Travelers' uninsured motorist insurance policy limit was much higher than the $300,000 full value of the case, it did not put pressure on Travelers to quickly pay. We waited for Ryan to complete his medical treatment, and generally you want to wait to settle the case until you're finished with your medical treatment because we don't know what's going to happen. For example, in this case, Ryan developed an allergic reaction, and we never found out what the allergic reaction was due to, but fortunately it resolved. After my attorney's fees and costs and paying back the workers' compensation lien and Ryan paying the out-of-pocket medical bills, Ryan received a check for $187,371 in his pocket. That's about 62% of the settlement. Ryan's case could have settled a lot quicker if Travelers would have had a $200,000 uninsured motorist insurance limit, because that combined with the at-fault driver Allstate's $100,000 bodily injury limit would have been equal to the fair value of the case. That would put pressure on Travelers to pay, because if they don't and we were to get a judgment above the $300,000, then Ryan could potentially sue them for bad faith. In this case, Travelers could potentially owe more than the uninsured motorist insurance limit. Travelers Insurance Company is the same company that's handling all lift accident claims in the state of Florida. Let's look at a case where GEICO paid the $100,000 bodily injury liability limits in under 4 months. My client Sarah was heading straight down the street. Another car was coming in the oncoming direction and made a left-hand turn, and Sarah T-boned her. The airbags deployed in Sarah's car. Sarah had a broken nose, and she also had a herniated disc, and she had a nerve block injection to her lower back. An ambulance took Sarah to the hospital, and Sarah, like many injured accident victims, asked me, how long will my personal injury case take to settle? What made GEICO pay its $100,000 bodily injury liability limits in under 4 months? First, we had a very heavy impact crash where the airbags deployed. Sarah had a broken nose. She was taken by ambulance to the hospital, and the doctor recommended lower back surgery. All those conditions put together created such an effect that GEICO thought the case may be worth more than $100,000, and they paid us in less than 4 months. Now, I pressured the at-fault driver's personal attorney that he hired to pay the $100,000 limits or otherwise face the possibility of owing us more than $100,000. Now, after my attorney's fees and costs and paying back Sarah's health insurance company and out-of-pocket medical bills, she received a check for $56,504, which is about 56.5% of the total settlement. How could Sarah's case have settled in much less than 4 months? Let's say a month or so. If she would have had immediate surgery, GEICO likely would have paid the $100,000 for her case. I'm referring to lower back surgery. Let's look at a motorcycle accident settlement that settled within 38 days of the crash. My client Pat was riding his motorcycle heading straight, and another driver took a stop sign and hit Pat. Pat broke his collarbone in the accident, and he was taken by ambulance to the hospital. Travelers Insurance Company insured the driver of the car that hit Pat. The other driver had a $50,000 bodily injury liability limit. Travelers felt that the case was worth $50,000 or more, so they paid us the $50,000 within just 38 days of the settlement. Unfortunately, the at-fault driver did not have any additional insurance, and Pat did not own a car with stacking uninsured motorist insurance on it. And Pat also did not have any uninsured motorist insurance on the motorcycle, and he did not live with any relatives that had uninsured motorist insurance stacking on their car. So we were limited to the at-fault driver's $50,000 policy limit. How could this case have settled in way under 38 days after the accident? If Pat would have had emergency surgery to his broken collarbone, the case would have likely settled in just a few days, like 10 days or so. Let's look at a case where I received a $25,000 settlement check in just 31 days after the accident. Shankiva was a passenger in a car. Another car was heading in the opposite direction. It crashed into the car in front of Shankiva, which pushed that car into Shankiva's car. Shankiva was taken by ambulance to the hospital. She had an acetabulum fracture, which is a fracture of the hip bone socket. Now, the other driver only had a $10,000 per person bodily injury liability insurance policy. Shankiva's boyfriend was driving the car that Shankiva was in, and he had $25,000 of uninsured motorist insurance with State Farm Insurance Company. Now, State Farm Insurance Company is typically very cheap in soft tissue accident cases. Here, State Farm paid within 31 days of the accident because they felt that Shankiva's case was worth more than $35,000 or so. This was a very heavy impact crash. The media came to the scene and took photos. Shankiva had to be hospitalized. Fortunately, she did not need surgery. However, State Farm did pay the $25,000 within 31 days. We also made a claim against the at-fault driver's insurance. Unfortunately, he only had $10,000 of bodily injury coverage, and she needed to split that with the driver of the car that she was in. He got $2,000, Shankiva got the $8,000, and the person in the car in front of Shankiva was unfortunately killed in the crash, and they got the remaining $10,000. How could this case have settled in a lot less than 31 days after the accident? The case would have settled a lot sooner if Shankiva would have had surgery to her hip socket fracture, or if she would have had a fractured femur, that's the bone between the knee and the hip, or a fractured tibula or fibula. State Farm likely would have paid in less than 31 days. The common theme that we've seen is when someone is badly injured and someone else is at fault, and the insurance limits are low in relation to the extent of the injury, it puts pressure on the insurance company to pay faster. On the other hand, even if someone is badly hurt, but the insurance policy limits are worth much more than the value of the injury, it does not put pressure on the insurance company to pay. Most auto accident cases and other personal injury cases, slip and falls, and all types of accidents do not result in serious injuries. This means it doesn't put much pressure on the insurance company to quickly pay. It's very important not to miss out on any available bodily injury liability insurance coverage. Let me give you an example. In one case, my client was driving straight through an intersection. She had a green light and another driver ran a red light. She went to the emergency room and got treatment. She broke her wrist and needed surgery. She had a plate and screws put in there, and she had some lower back pain. USAA insured the other driver, and I sent them a request for their insurance disclosure information under oath. USAA responded and told me their driver only had $100,000 of bodily injury liability insurance. It was only when I pressed USAA and the other driver on what they were doing at the time of the crash is when a couple months or so later, USAA told me that their driver was working at the time of the crash, and there was $1 million additional insurance policy. Had I not asked USAA what their driver was doing and asked for a written statement under oath, they would have likely never told me about the additional $1 million of insurance coverage. So this case resulted in a $200,000 settlement instead of a $100,000 settlement. So it's important to do a thorough investigation to make sure that you find out all the insurance coverage available. You don't want to be like that client there and potentially almost have missed out on $100,000 of coverage without an attorney. If my client did not have an attorney in this case, there's no way she would have discovered that there was more insurance and gotten $100,000 extra in settlement money. Now, sometimes people call me and they ask me if hiring a lawyer will delay their personal injury settlement. It's actually the opposite. If you have a personal injury lawyer, in addition to likely getting the settlement money faster due to them getting all of your medical records, bills, taking any witness statements, getting the 911 calls, etc., being able to settle your case faster, there's also some major advantages, such as your health insurance company or medical payments coverage insurer may have to reduce the amount of their payback claim from the settlement by your attorney's fees and cost. That can result in a significant savings. For example, in Ryan's case, the workers' comp insurer wanted over $85,000 back from the settlement. We ended up using Ryan's PIP to pay off that lien, and we only had to pay them around $3,000 from the settlement. If you want to learn more about how to maximize the value of your personal injury case in the shortest time possible, watch this video here.